Your name is, I don't even know how to say your name. Joseph Hedinger?
Hörmandinger.
Helming.
Joseph Hörmandinger.
Okay. And you work for one of the political parties?
I work right now. I'm a staff official of the parliamentary services of a small Austrian state parliament in Salzburg, state of Salzburg, and the reason why we know each other and why we talk today is because we used your method of wisdom councils within a special committee inside this parliament to bring about democracy reform. And by doing so came to some results that are now in a political discussion and become real more and more, step by step.
How do they become real? Can you give an example?
One of the suggestions we got out of the Wisdom Council, for example, was, because it was very surprising for me, that a group of normal people like you and me, non-experts, could come about with such an idea, was to measure wealth and economic success of a constituency not by GDP or GRP in that case, but by some index of happiness, which is of course common in some other places in the world, but that people would in a very material way, very rich part of the world would come about. Well, let's talk about our politics or about our politicians and what they do for us. Let's talk about not in terms of economic wealth or economic outcome, but in terms of how happy people are actually with their lives. And this is one of the things we are going to do in Salzburg. We will introduce, if the legislation passes, we will introduce kind of a happiness index, which is currently developed in one of our universities, and every year or every 2 years have this index brought into the house and being discussed like the normal annual or biannual budget.
Nice.
Yes, really.
And that came out of the Wisdom Council?
That came out of the Wisdom Council.
That's wonderful. I didn't know about that. That's great. So, yeah, I think that's consistent with my experience in that it's almost politically impossible for a politician to bring something forward like that and have it be received. Well, I don't know. It seems like if a politician brings that forward, first of all, there's like a debate that happens, and then it may come forward, but it doesn't have the momentum of the people behind it saying, yeah, this is how we want to measure ourselves. This is how we want to, and I think that's the most important piece is that it is the style of talking that creates this idea.
Yes.
Has a momentum that people can get excited about it and move forward with it.
Yes, right. I mean, what we see is that out of the wisdom councils that took place in Salzburg so far, which were three of them on the state level, that people, one of the most stunning experiences people told me about was that they felt that they would have some kind of, I would not say power, but an impact on how politics are done.
Nice.
Of course, there is always the political side to it. So at the end of the day, some politicians would decide about the matter. But in our view, that's the reason why they are elected in the first place. The other question is, how do they get to the issues to address? And as you said, as you mentioned beforehand, if a politician comes up with an issue, the first thing that happens is that everybody else within the political system uses the issue for positioning. So they're either for or against the whole thing, but nobody seems to have real interest in bringing the change about, really.
Huh.
And if this was my experience, if they see that there is the population behind this, then the necessity of really bringing it about is not in question anymore. There is no bargaining, no positioning. There is just politics that are really eager to bring the change about. And so I think that the change that is really necessary can only come out of the population. Politics will help to a certain degree, but there comes the point where politics is so self-involved, because that's how the whole system is constructed, that the real change that needs to happen cannot be expected from them. Nice. So this change has to come out of the population.
Wow, that's great. And so this is tying into the first questions you were going to ask me. Apparently you're answering them now in a way similar, in a better way maybe than what I had in mind. The reason why I wanted to ask you the question is we have this democracy reform in Salzburg. We have the Wisdom Council as a new form of participatory democracy in other parts of Austria and on the national level, even on the national level of Germany. I learned some days ago. They do wisdom councils for the post-Rio process on environmental care and sustainability. But we face change in how we do politics nowadays. We have, on the one hand side, we become very, very expert-like, and on the other hand, we going into very strange extremes of opinion, almost fanatical opinions about how the world is built. And for example, the refugee crisis in Europe, or the dissolution of the European Union after Brexit, or concerning the US, we'll know more about this, but the economic and social issues the US face. You, for example, try to address the problem of racism on a national level. So what we want to find out is what is it that lets wisdom councils or the people inside the wisdom council come about with real solutions without being experts or politicians. So how can they address a complex issue without probably knowing very much about it or being in real power? Yeah. And I think you started to talk about that, because what we normally have is experts and politicians, and right. we aren't addressing the complex issues that way. In other words, the question is, how is it possible that ordinary citizens can do this? But we have to remember, I think, that the politicians and experts aren't doing it. You know, they're crashing and burning when it comes to complex, difficult issues. Like you say, positioning themselves and going yes, no, and not on suboptimal ideas. They're not trying for what's best for everybody. They're trying to aim for what's possible to enact, and usually that's really small. And so, and they're trying to do it through a exclusively legislative, policy-oriented way. And what we're doing is having the citizens talk and think about these issues, and it should be ongoing. In other words, there should be this ongoing, regular Wisdom Council process, so that the Wisdom Council really brings up the issue that we're all dying to really talk about, and they put the elephant on the table that we're not really measuring our quality of life, for instance, in a way that makes sense with GDP, and they're talking about it in a way that can include the experts and the politicians, because the Wisdom Council presents and then they go away. And so the politicians and the experts are in the conversation. It's just that the people are doing the part of the job that they should be doing that has not been happening. The common sense, bringing the real issues up, talking about them in a heartfelt way, that part has been missing. And like you said, we now have a way to put the real issue on the table. Like I heard one time they did a national kind of Wisdom Council in Austria where it was kept sort of secret. They didn't really publicize it much, but they did it within the Department of Life, I think.
Yes.
And the issue was, why are we subsidizing these products that nobody actually wants?
Yes.
Why would we do that? And no politician could even say that.
That's true.
So, I mean, everybody was so beholden to the special interests. So they put the issue on the table, and they sort of facilitate the elected officials and the experts to talk thoughtfully, for once, about these really important issues. So it's not that they come up. I mean, I think a lot of times they're just putting the elephant in the room. They're making it visible, and now we can talk about it. And they often actually do come up with answers, or I mean, they can come up with the option that is best rather than that is most acceptable, and they can start an ongoing conversation that involves more than just policy.
Yes. So what I understand from what you're saying is that that expert wisdom should not be ignored, or you don't need the power of a politicians to bring change about, but what you say is there is a third element that is normally missing within the political process, and this is the, as you called it, the heartfelt opinion of the people. So what do you think does this heartfelt opinion of the people, as soon as it can enter the political process, what do you think this can change?
Well, I think it can change everything, because fundamentally, even if they don't come up with anything,
Yes.
even if they don't come up with an answer, which I think they will come up with an answer, with a strategy. But what we're doing now is we are coming back to the natural hierarchy of the democracy, which is where we the people, that's sort of an American term, we the people are really in charge. And then below that is the Constitution, and below that is the elected officials and the branches of government. And so just this, and the key ingredient in that is the caliber of the conversation.
Okay.
In other words, for there to be this thoughtful, we the people direction to society, for that to exist, it can't happen in the normal arguing kind of way. It can't happen in an agree-disagree way. It has to happen in this heartfelt, thoughtful, creative way where we're facing what seems impossible to effect, and yet we're making headway and getting somewhere, and we can tell the story of how much progress we're making, and feel excited about it. So to me, the nature of the Wisdom Council, if it's ongoing, and if we take real care in how the group talks and how the whole system talks, then we're creating a we the people, which is something close to true democracy, where we the people are really in charge, and the elected officials now can do the support the will of the people.
That's true. This raises, of course, all the issues that come about with the so-called participatory democracy or direct democracy, as we call it in Europe. I think direct democracy means something else in the United States, but it would be like the Swiss democracy, where people vote upon single issues every time they arise. So they do not, of course, they do elect politicians, but they also vote about every single issue by themselves. And there is always the critique that comes at this point that if you let people vote on issues or on solutions, then they do it in a very polarized way, probably not very fact-centered or not very evidence-based. And indeed, we see societies all around the world where public opinion seems to be awfully polarized, and there is no middle way anymore. There is a very white, very black, very right, very wrong, etc. So people, and it's true, people do think differently about the world. They have different answers to what is right or wrong, or might have a different culture of thinking, really. So how can dynamic facilitation or the Wisdom Council help to come to a common ground, or to share that the ideas about what the right way to go is, if values, underlying values, are very different?
Yes, the to me, there's two kinds of thinking here that we're talking about. One is what I would call decision making, and of course that's valuable. And the other is choice creating. And to me, they're like opposites, because when you make a decision, you are using your judging mind. You have to judge. You're basically selecting the best and eliminating the rest.
Right.
And we have a system that's structured for decision making, and really there's really no place for choice creating,
right,
which is the we the people conversation. So we have this decision making structure. We have, and within that, this yes/no conversation, this judging, this evaluating, this voting. We have things like direct democracy, which sounds great, but it's all part of the decision-making structure.
That's true.
And so we're just saying, oh, well, the citizens be the decision makers instead of the elected officials. Well, that's not the caliber of conversation we want. We want this other kind of conversation, choice creating. And in choice creating, to me, that is the heart of democracy, or it should be. And choice creating is basically where we all accept the differences that we have. We're different people, and we are facing the problems that we share, and we're listening to one another, and we're being creative together, and we're coming up with an answer that all of us can support, that all of us want, that works for everybody. That is not decision making. That is choice creating. And dynamic facilitation is a way to reliable way to evoke choice creating. That's why it's magical. That's why you can't just put traditional facilitation into a Wisdom Council and expect great results. So to me, that's the critical ingredient, is this dynamic facilitation evoking this spirit of all of us thinking, walking, thinking, talking together, and coming up with something that works for everybody. And then that's kind of a we, the people. And then within that structure, there can be important decision-making functions, but now we have trust. Now, because we're involved in setting the direction of society, we don't have to fight our elected officials. We don't have to fight the other side. We're more in a place of listening.
Yes.
Now, you asked, how does dynamic facilitation do that? Well,
yes.
One strategy of talking and thinking is to try and bridge differences. Try and talk across those differences. Try and sit down together and share stories and feel into one another's story and try and bridge the differences. That's obviously a really good thing to do, but it's not what I think is called for in this case. What's called for in this case is where essentially the two different views turn their chairs and they sit shoulder to shoulder and they're looking together at the problem. And there's a facilitator there that makes sure, that helps, no matter what anybody says, they help assure that the caliber of what's happening is creative. So when somebody says, well, that's a stupid idea, I can't believe how dumb you are, the facilitator jumps in and says, you have a concern. Let me write that down on the list of concerns. Now, tell me what you think is an even better idea. Let's write that down on the list of solutions. So even though the guy is being obnoxious or trying to be, it isn't long before he realizes or she realizes that hey, we're getting somewhere. Even though I'm bubbling up with my usual judgments, they're turned into non-judgmental statements that anybody can hear, and they make sense, and we're trying together to work them through. And so DF does that, and so we get random people, randomly selected people. They walk in the door. They aren't given a bunch of guidelines to try and manage themselves. We're saying, no, you just go ahead and just talk. But the facilitator makes sure that each comment is now contributes to the group, and that each person is valued, and the group is making headway toward a unity of perspective.
I understand. You once mentioned that you think that reflection is one of the most powerful modes of human communication. And what you tell me is, you said this guy sees or learns that we are getting somewhere. What I often saw in dynamic facilitation or in wisdom council was that people learned, what they learned most was about themselves. They got deeper into what they really think or what they really feel about the question or the problem. And so they became also more kind about the ideas of others. So I always had the impression empathy arises by thinking about oneself in the first place. Is this one of the things that really happen there?
Well, yeah, I think empathy is a natural outcome, because the more people get clear that they are, the more people get clear about that they've been talking in a way that doesn't really make sense, not to, and they begin to take in that, oh my goodness, this isn't quite what I feel. This isn't quite cover everything, and that other person has really making sense to me. It's safe for them to change their minds and to grow in their thinking. And in normal decision-making conversations, it's not safe to change your mind or grow in your thinking. So that's kind of what happens, and when people shift into that grow mode and that learning mode, I think it's just a natural outcome that they become empathetic, and to others, and more importantly, we all become oriented towards serving the whole. In other words, rather than me maximizing my special interest within the rules of the game, we shift out of that into, we're all here together to make sure that we serve society. We serve what's best for everybody. We find the answer that can best serve people. So if we do a random selection of citizens, for instance, and you don't get no refugees shows up, or no black people show up or something, it's okay, because the conversation, I mean, it's better if they do, but the conversation is really a different kind of conversation. We're not in the old conversation where if you aren't representative, you're kind of doomed, you know. We're in the conversation where everybody's trying to represent you anyway, and trying to, figure out what you would say if you were in the room. Because we're not, when the Wisdom Council speaks, they disband. They don't have any power. The conversation now does include everybody. And we want to keep that conversation in the spirit of choice creating, if at all possible.
So there is no real reason to come up with anything else but the best solution for everybody.
That's right. That's right.
Yes, because there's no other agency in the room, right?
That's right. It's all of us, and really, I think what becomes clear is that this win-win solution is better than any win-lose solution that I would have come up with in the decision-making world.
That's true. That's true. That brings me to a very important point also. You mentioned politicians, or the role of politicians. We talked a lot about representatives. You also have already worked with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation and other organizations and institutions in the field of democracy development. What would be a good next step for politicians or representatives to learn from what wisdom councils can show them? How can they take the results of wisdom councils to re-establish the trust of the electorate into their decisions?
Well, I think I think the critical piece here is that the politicians are currently in control. I would love to have them be part of a training. Actually, that would be one thing. Where we have kind of a choice creating for politicians or something like that, because
Yes.
they're stuck. They are stuck in a decision-making context. They actually are representing a constituency, and so in a way, they can't be authentic. And in the same way that just when we randomly select somebody, they just speak for themselves.
Yes.
So, and the politicians, the danger is that the politicians will use the Wisdom Council like a focus group, where, they really are using it for input to them so that they can know which way the wind's blowing.
Yes.
And use this result, and I'm happy to have that. Frankly, it's way better than a focus group. But really, what needs to happen is the Wisdom Council should be presenting to the public, and there should be efforts made to involve as many people as possible in hearing the Wisdom Council and in the having a moment to think and talk with others about the results and to kind of ratify the results in a way. I don't want them to be in an agree-disagree thing, but they can be in a yes, this is cool, and place where they contribute something else and keep the conversation going. So I think there's a natural tendency for politicians to try and hold that part back a little bit and use the Wisdom Council as something that helps the current game get better. And honestly, I think its real role is to change the game so that it's no longer a game, so that now we're in a real conversation about the difficult issues that we face, and we work together to solve them. And I think this would be so much more fun for politicians and so much more engaging for citizens. And I think it would just be a shifting kind of from this pretend win-lose conversation that's actually lose-lose to a win-win conversation.
Yes.
And that's so that's kind of my scoping out of what I think is needed with politicians.
Okay. Well, I'm happy that you mentioned that, because when we did our work in the special committee on democracy reform, we actually introduced dynamic facilitation into the committee work. So the politicians, the representatives would sit together.
That's great.
And DF all the topics of the special committee. And after they did it one time, they wanted it to be done every time.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes. We went through all the topics of the not only the wisdom councils or the legal foundation of wisdom councils into the state constitution and all that kind of things, but also on the other topics that were on the agenda. And after they had experienced it for one time, they wanted to be done every time they talked about the issues. It was from the very beginning, it was clear that at the end there would be a political decision of some kind.
Yes.
There would be a minority against a majority if it wasn't anonymous. So there was clear agency behind this, but it was so liberating for them and so making them happy about what they did. But just having the opportunity to sit together in this kind of way. So I think my personal experience is that probably it works better in a state parliament than in a national parliament, but that you really can bring politicians together in wisdom, or if it's not a wisdom council, because of course it's not randomly selected, but with dynamic facilitation, because having the opportunity to create choices is also helpful to them, I think.
That's great. Well, I've sort of shied away from that because I've been afraid that people would be representing, that you really require people to be authentic when you're in dynamic facilitation. And I was afraid that the representatives would reveal themselves in a way and then feel penalized for being open in some way, like if the press picked it up or if their constituency was worried about them or something like that. So I realized that they were in a difficult situation, and my experience in facilitating people who are in a role, I just feel like I need to help people get authentic, and when you have to maintain a role, it can be dangerous sometimes to be authentic. So I've sort of steered clear of that, but it sounds like it's working.
Yes, it really did. I mean, the sessions of the special committee were all public. There were not many people watching really, but they were public, so they had to be aware about the fact that people could actually watch them being DF'd. But if you do it like in a normal kind of way, where the wisdom council is in a closed setting, so nobody is really watching, which is I think normally the case with a wisdom council, then I think after the process nobody would have the idea, well, I blame the other guy for having maintained this or that opinion within or while being DF'd. Although the other person is from another party or is my opponent in some kind of political issue. So I think as long as you keep to really doing dynamic facilitation, nobody will hold any grudges after the process.
Yeah.
Probably they cannot carry the whole solution through the political process because there is a political process afterwards.
Right.
But I think over time, and if you do it repeatedly, like they do it in Vorarlberg, for example, if you do it for a longer period of time, as you said, as an ongoing process, then you probably are even able to change political culture or the communication culture within the political system, because people are so much more happy about talking with one another in this way than the way we have now.
That's great. That's great. I'm thrilled to hear that can work in that environment. We have a local representative that they have a closed door meeting, and been trying to get him to talk to me about that, and maybe dynamically facilitate that, but I haven't really gotten anywhere with it. It's a bipartisan group, but they're
Yes.
honest with one another, and they basically say, hey, look, I can't change my position even though I don't feel that way.
Yeah. And that might be true also, but I think over time I think the system will by itself start to give them more personal impact about their own decisions and not along the party line all the time, because parties, at least in Europe, parties more and more are aware of the fact that the party line takes them nowhere.
Yeah.
As hard as that there is, of course, left or right wing extremism, and this might be good for some people or for an increasing number of people, but at the end of the day, parties realize that the stronger they keep to some predefined party line, the more they alienate people, because there are no results coming out of the process.
Yeah.
So probably this is a point of entry where things can loosen up to some kind of personal responsibility and personal agency of representatives.
One thing about the Wisdom Council process that I'm trying to get my hands around is the whole idea of stepping back. In other words, there's a momentum moving forward in life, in the parliament, in the public domain, and what we're after in the Wisdom Council process is some kind of stepping back where all the people can kind of say, hey, how are we doing? Is this okay? We have a moment of self-reflection, and then we go forward again. And I see this phenomenon all the time. They call it a sabbatical, they call it a Sabbath, they call it a retreat, a meditative moment, whatever. There's even religious services. So many things involve this stepping back phenomenon. And I've created a name for it. I call it a TOBE, or a to-be, T-O-B-E, right? I remember I went to the management of this company when I was working in the timber company, and I basically said to them, look, the employees work 40 hours a week, and if you take 1 hour out of production so that they only work 39 hours a week, you would think that that hour out of production would reduce the productivity by so much, by 2.5%.
Yes.
But actually, what we're going to do in that 2.5% is we're going to work on the biggest problem in the mill. And we're going to make progress. But B, even if we didn't make any progress, we're going to actually make progress on that problem and solve it. But even if we didn't make any progress on that issue, we would have a higher productivity rate than 100%.
Yes.
And somehow or other, I got away with it. They bought it. and it turned out to be true by far. I mean, productivity and quality soared.
Yes.
So, but I've ever since then, I remember standing there making that point. I realized that is so true about life. I mean, it's not just this mill, but it's just something that happens, and that's kind of where the Wisdom Council comes in. It's like it's taking our society and giving us finally a chance to step back and think about who we are and what we're doing, and not take it all in through extrinsic measures like GNP and these other measures that we've got. But
right.
we're now looking within and finding, okay, who are we as a people, and what do we want to have happen, and where do we want to go? So
our focus is always dragged away by so many things in daily life, and we live out our lives in this daily mode of focusing on something that needs to be done immediately, or stuff really happening very fast in a very fast pace. So probably if somebody had the power to really step back and being able to perform that would be one of the hugest powers in the world right now, because nobody seems to be able to do that. Even the most powerful people in I don't know, investment trusts or some kind of bank, they are in this mill of having to do what they do all day long, and do it even faster than the day before. And if you really have the power to step back and reflect upon what are we doing, is this to help anybody, then this would be a huge power, really huge power.
Well, I think the Wisdom Council can do that. I think you and I, with a couple $1 million and a few other, turned on people, could set in motion a global Wisdom Council that could have a stepping back of we, the species, and rethinking what we're doing, start managing our commons, our collective well-being.
It would be nice to try out.
Yes.
I don't think that we would need a couple of $1 million, because I think it would be easier to really do that. But it would be nice to just try it out, because we would have to do it repeatedly anyway, so we could all the same just start with it.
Yes, right. Well, we have to fly people from, we have to figure out how to randomly select people from the globe and fly them together and turn on the media to covering all this, and we need to set up some kind of a Google or Facebook or something where everybody starts talking, so that everybody can be in the conversation if at some level, and where the conversation can grow. And so that's kind of my my vision for what needs to happen if we can really want to solve climate change, and some of these other monster issues.
Yes. I mean, do you think that there is some kind of critical mass to all that you when we look at people who do wisdom councils for a much longer time than we are doing in Salzburg for Alba, for example, who do wisdom councils for at least 10 years now, it seems to me that what a part of what they try to do is by repeatedly do wisdom councils to create something like a critical mass of people who have gone through this process at least once and have experienced what it means to create choices, and probably let that sink into daily life behavior also, or into political communication when they do it, or feeling to be empowered by this experience. So do you think that there is a critical mass, or do you think that let's put it in a very blunt way, that 12 out of mankind would do it?
Well, I kind of think 12, I'm thinking 24 now, but 12 to 24, someone there, but I think 12 to 24 can do it. I think it's, I think critical mass is a model of change that certainly operates. It's happening. It's also called tipping point, or
Right.
it is a
Right.
phenomenon that's out there in the world. But but there's another kind of change out there too, and to me, it's what we're doing is, what's possible. I think is a little bit like. My image is one image is we want to light the room. Okay, one thing we could do is have one guy have a candle, and he lights the next candle and the next candle, and everybody goes and does a candle, and finally we have the room all lit. Or we could notice that the room is wired for electricity and there's a light bulb up there, and we can run over and find the switch and flip it. And the whole room goes on. And we don't have to do all that. Those are two different models of change. I think the Wisdom Council works more with the flipping the switch model than it does the light the candle model. They're both operating, but to me, it's what we've got is a reflection. It's a reflective process. So the Wisdom Council is the 24 people that are randomly selected. And if you and I set up the room properly so that it is wired well and so forth, then they become a switch in the sense that if we're working on some big, impossible to solve issue like climate change, and as soon as people start to notice that this treaty really isn't going to, the Paris Treaty really can't do it, and something, and the different technologies really aren't enough, and the meditating alone in the room isn't enough, and the living in local communities isn't enough, and all these things that people are doing, it isn't enough. Then there's kind of this moment of checking in and desperation and whatever, and looking to this conversation that's happening in the Wisdom Council, I think, where the Wisdom Council is saying, here is where we are, here's where we need to go, this is how we can do it. And all of it, and if all of us look at that and go, yes, then, and we're all on the same page, we're all moving in the same direction, we all have a way to think through this issue collectively and work together with a shared vision and a shared understanding of the problem and a shared sense of work, helping one another to achieve that. And we don't need a hierarchy to tell us what to do. And we don't need a marketplace to tell us what to do. We have a new way to do economics and politics. I call it to-beism. Yes. Instead of socialism or capitalism or democracy or whatever, I call it to-beism, where we collectively are starting to come into consciousness, collective consciousness.
Yes.
I think this is real. I think we can do this. And that this is the next evolutionary step that we that we have to come to. We have to be collectively conscious about our planetary resources. We can't just trash them.
that would be a nice way to go, anyhow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the deal is that, yeah, the timing isn't right, but if we get this process going, I think there'll be a crisis, and in a crisis, people open to new possibilities, and there's a way that we can shift the whole governing structure of our society.
That would be a good path.
Yeah, I think it's workable. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and I'm kind of thinking through with you a little bit of the theory part, and then maybe kind of approach some philanthropy people and try and just start it globally, because we've done lots of local experiments and it works, or it can work. I don't know that we haven't got that level of change happening yet in our Austrian experiments, for instance, but
Yes.
but I think it's where we're going.
I mean, it's always hard to say, but I believe that as soon as you as a innovation, an innovation is introduced and is in the world, it cannot be undone anymore. So the world cannot continue as if it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
So in some way, the system has already begun to shift or to change into this direction, and of course, I think it's a matter of intensity. So if we do it more, might happen faster or might happen better.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, there's no real reason not to try it out.
Right. There's
There
no
are
reason. It's right.
a lot of reason to just do it.
It's really cheap. I mean, $2 million or something, and I mean, we just need a few people that get it. I think, to get, hey, well, this is worth trying. We could try this, and so much of it hinges on understanding the theoretical difference between a decision-making process, which is what we've structured, not globally, but we don't even have that globally, but we've done that in our nations, and choice creating. So, and the national level and the regional level especially are missing the choice creating, and we can feed that, we can provide that. But globally, we don't even have a decision-making process, really. We don't have anything except the capitalist marketplace, as far as I can tell.
That's true.
So that's why I think working globally is probably the best, it might even be the easiest way to make this happen.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
because the real reason why there are no global decision-making processes is because you would have to interface at some point with a national decision-making process, and nations are not really letting themselves be told from somebody else what to do.
right.
Except that they actually are getting told by markets what to do nowadays. But if you address people in the first place, just common people, then the not being there of a decision-making process is not that big of a deal, because you don't need that in the first place. You just need to talk to people. And that's probably better manageable in a global setting. I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really about, if all of us could step back at a global level and think together in a way that was supportive, and where this empathy that we've talked about is released, and where we're listening and we're coming to some shared, where we've changed our minds from self-interest to the collective interest, which is, I think,
Yes.
what happens. What issue wouldn't that affect? And dramatically,
Yes, of course. That would change everything.
That would change
probably.
everything. Right.
So,
Fun conversation.
that's true.